He is the Director of Performance, and our key topic for our chat today is on team-based athletes and how to improve your agility. So for high-performance coaches out there, strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapists, or perhaps parents that are working with their kids, and of course athletes, make sure to stick around as there'll be gems all the way through the show. But thank you for jumping on, Scott. Really looking forward to our chat.
Thanks, Jack. I really look forward to it as well. And, I'm fired up. Been following the show and I'm fired up to get to talk shop here.
Yeah, likewise, mate. And yeah, thank you for jumping on. I know it's later than it is for those tuning in Australia. So I really appreciate your time that you've given us, as well as the time that you've booked in to make this work, mate. But for those that, I'm sure there'll be a lot of S&Cs that are aware of your work and your background, but for those that aren't in the industry, mate, do you mind giving us a background on how you got into the industry and how you worked your way up to what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. You know, the longer I'm in this profession, the bio gets longer and longer, but I'll try to cut to the point. So I grew up in California. In high school, I played football, baseball, and rugby, actually. Which in the U.S., obviously isn't as big. Australia obviously is, it's huge. But I'm a big rugby fan and played that in high school. Went to college and played football at UC Davis. I actually majored in English and communications, which is kind of unique for my bachelor's degree. I ended up getting a master's degree in kinesiology, as well as every certification under the sun. But what's unique about my bachelor's degree is that, as you know, communicating and the ability to express yourself, whether it be verbally or through the written word, is huge. And I would say that I use those skills on a daily basis as much as I use my kinesiology, because just the ability to communicate is huge. So I wouldn't replace that experience. Went to graduate school, got my master's degree in kinesiology. Started my career actually as an intern with the Oakland Raiders in the NFL, that's a bit unique. The first time I'm ever coaching anybody or telling anybody what to do. I'm at the highest level, and I'm 23 years old at the time, and they've got a number of Hall of Fame athletes on that team, and I don't really know what I'm doing yet, but I was brought in because I was a competitive Olympic weightlifter. And at the time, the team was moving. At the time in the NFL, a lot of the programs were machine-based. And so teams were moving towards more of a movement-based Olympic lifting, on-your-feet type model. And I was a competitive Olympic lifter, so I was able to come in and at least teach those lifts. And as well as all the dirty work that an intern does. From there, I went to Sacramento State, as I mentioned. Spent about 4 or 5 years there, actually. First as a graduate assistant, got my master's degree in kines, and got my first full-time job there as well. And my mentor there, Gary Uribe, deserves a lot of credit, because one thing that I always tell young strength coaches is, what is irreplaceable in my book is finding someone, a good mentor early on, that can teach you the right way to do things and can teach you, or at least show you, what it should look like at a high level early on. And to me, those experiences were vital for me, because I always think back, like at the time, I didn't know a lot, and I didn't necessarily even know what it was supposed to look like. So if I had gone in and someone was backwards, I probably would have thought, oh, this is what it looks like, and who knows where I'd be, right? So the ability to see it done at a high level and learn it the right way, right away, was huge to me. So I spent a good amount of time there. From there, I went to the University of Louisiana, spent a couple years there. And at this time, I'm working with every sport under the sun, right? I'm working with court sports, field sports, still primarily football. That's my background, but every sport under the sun. I left Louisiana and worked for Sparta Performance Science. And that name might register with a lot of people. They're kind of worldwide now with their force plate technology and software. It was an outstanding opportunity to get in on the ground level with them And literally at the time, I believe they had like 4 or 5 employees. And now they've got 200 or whatever they've got, and they're working with high-level teams all over the globe. But the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Wagner and literally get on a whiteboard and look at these force plate scans and try to make heads or tails of it, on a grassroots level. And it's a system that they've now perfected. But what a valuable learning experience. And it completely changed the way that I looked at movement, right? So
Mm.
now, in addition to being qualitative, it was also qualitative and quantitative in many ways. And I was like, this is outstanding. So from there, went back to the Oakland Raiders briefly for a second go round. And then I went to the UC Berkeley. And from then on, I was pretty much exclusively football, American football. Obviously, I spent 4 years there. Then from there, I went to Texas Tech University. Spent 3 years there as the director of speed and power, where I had an outstanding opportunity to really run and develop the movement program from speed to agility to explosiveness. And the head strength coach there, Rusty Witt, really gave me carte blanche to do everything that entrusted me, really, along with Coach Kingsbury, the head football coach, entrusted me with getting these guys faster, more athletic in many ways, I'm sure, that we're going to talk about later in the show. So that was really my first time cutting my teeth in terms of running a large segment of the program at what we call the Power 5 level, which is the highest level of college football. From there, I went to Texas State University briefly as the head strength and conditioning coach. From Texas State, I went to University of South Carolina. Once again, exclusively with football. Had an outstanding time at South Carolina working for Paul Jackson, who's one of the guys that I respect in this profession immensely. We had been wanting to work together for a long time. Outstanding opportunity there to obviously implement my craft at a high level, but also he really taught me how to. The term CEO is kind of cliche now in terms of being a strength coach CEO or whatever, but really operate as a professional on so many levels outside of just the X's and O's of strength and conditioning, from how you run a staff to how you interact with coaches to how you be an administrator of your craft. And so I learned a lot there. From there, I went to Washington State University. So that's all told by that point, that's about a decade. I know I described it quickly, but that's about a decade of Power 5 college football there. Um, you know, and at Washington State, I finally came to the realization, as we mentioned before the show started, that um, at that level, it's about wins and losses, and that's great. And but for me, I had 2 daughters at home, and now, as I mentioned, I'm blessed with 2 stepsons and a son on the way. That really, like, they love me unconditionally, right? And it's not about wins
Mm.
and losses with them. Um, and I finally realized that I'm not spending enough time being a dad to my daughters, and that's not to say that you can't be a great dad at that level. You can. But I got to the point where I felt like it was more important to me to spend more time raising my own kids instead of around other people's kids. And so I decided to make the move to the high school level. So now I'm the director of athletic performance at Bishop Lynch High School, which is the largest co-ed private high school in the state of Texas. And so I'm able to continue to apply my trade and coach athletes and develop them. But also I'm able to be more present in my children's lives, which is at this stage of my career extremely important to me. So that's kind of a long-winded, but as brief as I could keep it, explanation
Yeah.
of how I got from point A to point B.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and it's great to have context. I think before we get into what we're, a specific focus on, like you mentioned, athletic performance, but to get that understanding, particularly for strength and conditioning coaches, there was some things that stood out to me in terms of your background from an academic point of view. How you mentioned the importance, in hindsight, how important that communication degree was, as well as understanding the body with kinesiology and putting them together. The weightlifting background, actually having a real skill set and how they got you in the foot in the door in elite sport straight away early, and then having a mentor, a really strong mentor early on in your career, really, I guess, taught you the ropes in terms of your foundations of how to do things and how to operate. And then as you're building closer and closer to your degree, to your career, you're focusing more on the management side and less of the art of S&C, but more about people and how to manage. So yeah, it's great, mate. A great journey in elite sport, and a good stepping stone in terms of development for strength and conditioning coaches. That everything has value if you approach it the right way. How much of that experience and development was structured, and how much was it sort of just own what was in front of you and make the most of it, and then see where it takes you in terms of finding your mentors and taking up weightlifting and doing your degrees?
Yeah. I definitely think that I definitely think, and this is a big point of contention now, right? Like, how important is a degree really? How important is a certification really? I think it's all important. I think I see, people that maybe put the cart in front of the horse if they devalue a formal education a little bit. And now make no mistake, honestly, my degree and even my certifications did not teach me much in terms of how to be a high level coach. But what it did do is I feel like it gave me a well rounded background and comprehensive, at least foundation, so that the things that I saw as I started to get in the environment and get more experience made sense to me, right? I had a basis of comparison. I could look at something and I at least had somewhat of an idea uh, um, of, of what questions to ask, even, right? Or what am I even looking for here? You know, and so I do think there's value in having a formal education and the certification process, just because at least that gives you a background and a foundation. Now, from there, obviously, as I mentioned, finding a mentor and cutting your teeth, trial by fire, as they say, right? Like, there's only so much that you can learn without actually being in the environment. And it might look great on a piece of paper. It might look great on the pages of a book or on the screen of your laptop, but it's a whole different thing when it's live action and bodies are moving. And I think a great example of that I can think of, and one thing that I've kind of hung my hat on, and I guess made a name for myself in this profession, is speed and agility, right? And that's what I've spent a lot of my time at the highest level developing or being hired to develop. But I remember at Sacramento State, the first time I was put in charge of coaching speed, and everyone ran by, and I was like, what do I even say? I mean, that happened so quick. They all flew by. I mean, I know what I'm supposed to say, but I didn't see what happened. It happened too quick. And now, like, when I watch these athletes sprint, it almost happens in slow motion. So that's an example of, you could pour over every book or watch every video out there, but unless you've watched someone sprint and tried to coach them, it's going to happen very fast, and it's going to be difficult. And I think there's something to experience. I feel like I'm outstanding at coaching what I do because I have that knowledge base. If you asked me to coach a golf swing, I would be stuttering and stammering, and you would think I was a horrible coach because I have no knowledge in that subject, right? So I think, again, back to the education piece, having the knowledge is the start, because that gives you your basis of comparison. But then you've got to get out there and you've got to actually coach it, and you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to make some mistakes. Like, again, I've made a name for myself coaching speed, but I actually, my first internship, like I mentioned, with the Oakland Raiders, I think back, and I'm 23 years old out there, and I'm telling these professional football players, I'm telling them to keep their elbows locked at 90 degrees when they sprint, you know. And I think back and I'm like, why did I tell them that? We know that that doesn't happen, and we know that that's not right. But like I said, at the time, that was all I knew. That's what, and as time goes on, you learn more and you start coaching it, and everything slows down and you're able to explain more. And now, I think, as well as the qualitative piece, as I mentioned, the quantitative piece, we're able to gather data for everything. So Sparta started that for me, um, as far as numbers associated with movement, with the force plate, how athletes jump, and things of that nature. And now it's gone to a whole nother level. Last spring, I was able to work side by side with Les Spellman on an NFL draft class, and on the team as well was Ryan Grubbs. You may have seen him on social media. He does some work with Jonas Dodu. He works with the Texans here, and talk about pioneering a system of analyzing sprint kinematics. It was incredible, the stuff we were doing, and the amount of data that we were able to look at literally for every single step of an athlete's sprint. So that just deepens the well even more in terms of knowledge and what feedback you're able to give an athlete. Um, and obviously, that at that level where your millions of dollars are at stake, that's called for. That same knowledge applies every day, even with my developmental athletes. I obviously don't go as far down the rabbit hole telling a developmental athlete, your ground time is a tenth of a second too long there, and your air time isn't long enough. I simplify it for them, but I'm looking at the same stuff, right? Like that knowledge base. That knowledge base applies to both. It's just a matter of delivery and your audience. And that brings us back to the communication piece, knowing your audience. And that was one thing that always, early in my career, Charlie Francis was a big influence on me. Obviously, he's now passed away. Ben Johnson's speed coach. And that was one thing that always blew me away about him, was how simple he could make these concepts that were high level concepts. And that's one thing I've always strived to do, is to be able to take something, um, and know it so thoroughly as I explained. View a jump from through the lens of a force plate, view a sprint from a very thorough breakdown of the kinematic data, but then be able to package it and tell someone a simple cue that will hopefully address everything we're trying to work on. So I honestly forgot what the question even was. I'm sorry I got out on a tangent, but
No, it was just more elaborating. How I guess for the audience, for those developing S&Cs, success leaves clues. So to go into detail around some of those key areas that have worked well for your career, I think is important. And before we get into the topic, on that note, career highlights that spring front of mind. Is there some that you want to share?
So I remember, my first, when I finally made it in my mind, or was able to work at the Power Five collegiate level and coach and stand on the sideline in stadiums at Ohio State University, University of Georgia, some of the big time traditional blue blood programs. That was pretty cool to me, because growing up as a college football fan here and seeing all those programs on TV, and now I'm coaching against them, or I'm at Cal, UC Berkeley, which is, a half hour from where I grew up. And instead of being in the stands, watching the game, I'm standing on the sideline and coaching on the field that I grew up, again, sitting in the stands watching. So those were all, big time highlights for me, some of the players I've coached, you know, I was blessed to be able to coach guys like Patrick Mahomes, who's, you know, possibly the best football player in the world right now, and be a part of a small part of his journey, along with numerous other professionals. But I'm gonna give you a different answer to this question than you're probably anticipating. So I'm a big WWE fan, professional wrestling fan, and
Mm-hmm.
that may, you know, some of your listeners right now are cheering, and some of them are sitting there saying, "Oh my gosh." But I'm a big WWE fan, and when I was at Texas Tech, prior to practice, Coach Kingsbury, he's also a big WWE fan, we put on a match in the stadium, and I came down, and you know, we did professional wrestling moves. Me and another coach. I got put through a table, and I got pinned, and they posted that video, and it went viral. So I think now it's got like 330,000
Oh,
likes. It's
wow.
got like several million views. So I always laugh that me getting put through a table basically in my underwear. It was on Sports Center. It was on ESPN Sports Center. It was on Sports Illustrated. So more
I'll have
people
to
have
check it
seen me
out.
get put through a table in my underwear than have ever seen or heard of me as a coach. But WWE saw that and sent me an authentic WWE title belt, which is like one of my most prized possessions. So I'm sorry that I had to divert from the world of sport, but for me, that was the opportunity to do that, and for it to
Yeah.
become as big as it did, and it still gets reposted to this day, and it's like 5 years later. So that was a pretty cool, kind of dorky, but pretty cool moment for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine once you've you know, when you're in those moments, you probably don't appreciate as much as you are. But now that, you know, being able to reflect on those highlights, you realize how big of a deal it really is. But like you mentioned, being on the sidelines and witnessing these special moments, and then being part of it. Of
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what about on the flip side, challenges that have significantly, you know, that you faced? I imagine, you know, high performance sport, there's it's high pressured moments and things always don't go to plan. And yeah, what have you sort of learnt from those, or how have you grown from those
I
challenges?
would say career wise, as you mentioned, as a profession, the higher you go up, the more pressure there is to win, and it's not everything is obviously in your control. You know, I know plenty of outstanding strength coaches that coach on teams that don't win very many games, and I know plenty of mediocre strength coaches that are on teams that win plenty of games, and that's not always in your control. And the unfortunate side of that is, as I have been, sometimes when you don't win enough games, even if you think you did an outstanding job, and you're left looking for another job, you know,
Mm.
and that's the ugly side of the profession, and that's part of why I decided I got to stop moving all over the country and stay in one place and raise my kids. So as a profession, that's a challenge. But I'd like to talk about some stuff, just, you know, as a strength and conditioning coach, things that are or have been a challenge, and kind of how I dealt with it and grew from it. So thinking back from early in my career to now, as I told you briefly earlier, uh, I used to spend all this time and obsess over drafting up the world's greatest program that had every perfect periodization, every exercise and progression that I could ever imagine, and this is going to be perfect. And it didn't play out the way that I envisioned it because I neglected the logistics side, right? And so that, and I'm not saying I'm as organized and obsessed with preparation as anybody. Um, but now I work backwards. Now I think in terms of logistics, as I program, because at the end of the day, if you can't implement it, it's not the world's greatest program. right? So even if you look at it and say, man, this has got it all, if you go on the floor and it's unorganized and chaotic and it's not what the athletes need, then it's not the best program. So now I still spend a lot of time and am very prepared and organized and still possibly obsessed about my programming, but I view it through a different lens, I guess you would say. I
Mm-hmm.
The lens I look at it through is, okay, what's this going to look like on the floor? What's this going to look like on the field? And even if uh, theoretically I love it, if there's a piece that I know, all right, this is going to take too long, or I don't know if they're ready for this, it's got to go. Right. So I think my advice to a young strength coach is always have that logistic mindset. All right. Always envision what it's going to look like playing out before you get so obsessed with building the perfect program. And the other piece, as we kind of hit on earlier, is the communication piece. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Early in my career, it used to be frustrating. And I'm sure we've all experienced it with we love it so much, right? We can't imagine doing anything else. How could you not love coming into the weight room and getting better? Well, you know as well as I do, not everyone loves it, right? Or they love it for different reasons, or they love this piece of it, but not that piece of it. So the challenge over the course of my career became how to be a better communicator so that I can reach a variety of different athletes, right? So that not only can I motivate the meathead that wants to get in here and lift every weight in the room? But how can I motivate the guy that really only wants to play his sport and I'll come in here because I have to? Or the kid that honestly doesn't like to train at all? How can I reach each of those individuals? And there's countless other examples of people with different backgrounds and histories and feelings about training and preparation. And how can I reach all of them? Right? How can I be consistent and stable in my philosophies, but variable enough in my communication and empathetic enough with the different athletes I'm coaching that I can reach them. Uh, because at the end of the day, it's on you, right? Like a long time ago, and this is something I learned at Cal at UC Berkeley. So their rugby program uh, here in the States, you know, they've won whatever, it's either 22 or 24 national championships. I mean, it's the elite collegiate rugby program, and their coaching staff, Jack Clark and Tom Billups, I was having a conversation with them one day, and it completely flipped the way I looked at things. They basically, I forget their exact words, but the gist of it was it's never the athlete's fault. And that doesn't mean that the athletes shouldn't be held accountable. Like it's never their fault. Like just carte blanche to do whatever they want to do. Obviously, they need to be held accountable. But what it does mean is that if the athlete isn't successful at the end of the day, you're the professional. It's your job to figure out what's going on or what went wrong, and hold yourself accountable for that athlete's success or lack thereof. And it completely flipped how I viewed things, because it's real easy to be like, oh, that kid's uncoachable, or oh, he's lazy, or oh, whatever other excuse in the book. But great, he might be uncoachable, but you know what? You got to find a way to coach him. So what are you going to do? How are you going to motivate him? He might be lazy, but you know what? He's motivated by something, and you better find what that is. So that really flipped my perspective on that. So those are two challenges, both in terms of the X's and O side, being logistical minded, as well as just science minded, and then also the communication piece of, regardless of who you've got to find a way to reach them, and also you've got to find a way to communicate with them, right?
Yeah,
Like you can't.
it's a great mindset.
There are guys that want the science, right? There are guys that are almost as big of a dork as I am, and they want to know, every piece of physics that you can bust out on what this exercise does. And then some guys don't want any of that, and you start doing that, they'll just tune you out, right? So you got to know how to speak to each and every one, whether it be connecting it to movements in their sport. Or maybe it is the science for some guys, or maybe it's, just tough love for others. Whatever it is, you got to find it. And I like to think that that's the area that I've grown in the most over my career, and continue to grow in both of those areas, as we all will, or as long as we stay in the profession.
Yeah, 100%. It's yeah, well said. It's probably what draws us to it, and for those that stick at it for as long as you can, have that open mindset of continually getting better, because it is so complex working with humans. And but yeah, if you approach it with that perspective, like you said, take on the responsibility, don't take the easy route, and find a way. No doubt the athletes will be better for it. So we better move into the key topic. Perhaps we'll start with agility and then spend some time on max velocity speed. But from your point of view, what are the key fundamentals for performing agility actions on game day? So for game day performance, I guess for the athletes listening in, what are some key fundamentals?
So for me, and this really, obviously more so at the developmental levels, but I would say even all the way up to the professional, I always start with the underpinning qualities. It's very tough to be agile, or when we talk about agility, multi-directional movement, the ability to basically, agility, we're talking about the ability to meet a task with the required solution on the field of play, whatever that might look like. A multi-directional movement, or stopping, starting, accelerating, whatever that is. The ability to put the key in the lock, so to speak. And I'm always going to start with the underpinning qualities. It's really tough to be able to meet those agility needs, or those movement needs, with a glaring hole in your foundation, whether it be strength, whether it be mobility, stability, speed. Some of the underpinning qualities, I think, being a part of a comprehensive program and a well-balanced athlete to begin with, is where I'm always going to start. So if an athlete is not strong enough, or can't run very fast linearly, those are areas we need to address. And obviously, concurrently, we're working on multi-directional speed anyway, but I think a lot of those underpinning qualities are really underrated in terms of their ability to address everything. I promise you, if you get someone stronger and faster, as long as you're working on agility, whatever that looks like to you, and obviously we'll get into down the rabbit hole of what that looks like to me, but if you're developing those qualities, I'm willing to bet you that the athlete becomes more agile if that's what their need is, if they're lacking something in the foundation, so to speak. So that's always where I'm going to start. From there, and this is a piece, that has really become hot, so to speak, in the last few years, is, and it sounds so simple, but the ability to decelerate, to stop. Almost every change of direction, it requires some sort of slowing down. And early in my career, and it may sound crazy, but that's really not how we thought about it back then. We didn't think about deceleration. We thought about footwork. We thought simply about repositioning the feet, pointing yourself in a different direction, and that was agility, right? But now we know the forces at play, the eccentric forces, the eccentric rate of force development, the ability to stop and slow down your body. That's going to be the next underpinning quality, that allows you to change direction. So I spend a ton of time working on not only the mechanics of that, but as I mentioned, the strength qualities that go into being able to do that as well. From there, assuming that you are strong enough, you're explosive enough, and when I say strong enough, strong in all the different special strengths, so to speak, whether it be speed strength, strength speed, explosive strength. We're good at all of those. We're able to accelerate, we're able to decelerate. At that point, it becomes being able to withstand the forces required of different change of direction movements, whether it might be a 90-degree cut, it might be an angular cut, it might be 180-degree cut. All of those require not only different footwork, but different angles, different body positions, and different forces at play. So I'm going to put the athletes in closed drills where they're able to experience all of those forces at the highest level. And you know that lately has come under fire a little bit, especially in terms of the NFL Combine and the evaluative process. Why are they running the 5-10-5 drill, the 3-cone drill? It's just, when do you run around cones? You don't, and that's and we'll speak plenty about that and how that's not necessarily a good indicator of, as you mentioned, game speed or game agility. But I like it because it allows you to really experience the highest threshold of decelerative and accelerative forces in a multi-directional pattern. And I would be remiss to mention plyometrics as well. Obviously, in the underpinning qualities, we're talking about plyometrics, horizontal, vertical, rotational, multi-directional as well. So we're doing that. We're doing that along with the strength and speed development as well. But assuming you're able to withstand the forces and redirect the forces in a closed environment, now it becomes reacting to stimuli. And initially, in more of a general, I guess you would say, manner, like, can you execute these high speed, sudden stopping, going movements in response to something from the environment? Because really, other than a combine situation where you're racing the stop clock or the stopwatch, it always is in response to something else, right? You would never just think about any sport, whether it be rugby on a breakaway or football. If no one's in front of you, why would you change direction? You would just keep running, right? So it's always in response to stimulus. And initially, just at the most basic level, right? Something very simple, whether it be an opponent going left or right, or even a coach making some sort of signal, or really, in my mind, there's two general ways where you might have to react to an opponent. One would be mirroring, right? Like, I'm trying to shadow you, I'm trying to follow you. So imagine in basketball, I'm guarding you. Maybe in some other sports, I'm following you. You're my guy. I got to follow you. All right. So I'm mirroring you. Or pursuit, right? I'm trying to get you. You're trying to run away from me. So I'm in a situation where you're trying to evade me, and I can't let you evade me. I'm trying to get to you. So really, I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of thinking of, your only limit is your creativity in terms of thinking of utilizing multi-directional movements in response to situations where you have to follow somebody, shadow somebody, or where you have to evade or pursue somebody. And it doesn't even need to involve your sports ball or any type of strategy or anything like that. Just simple opportunities to utilize some of the deceleration patterns that you've taught your athletes in response to an outside stimulus. And then obviously the next layer would be specific sport skill, right? So like for us, that would be tackling, for instance, right? So let's say I've taught you how to accelerate, decelerate. I've taught you how to mirror somebody or follow somebody, and I've taught you how to pursue somebody that's trying to evade you. But now you're there, and now what? Right? Okay, I got you. Now what? Well, now is the sport skill, right? So now at that point, we work on actually tackling, bringing guys down to the ground. That's one thing that, and we do it year round. A guy that I follow on Twitter, I've never actually talked to him, but Andrew Ryland posts a ton of great stuff. And I actually play, and I use the term loosely, but sevens rugby last summer. And I incorporate a lot of those rugby drills with American football players, because it never made sense to me how tackling is such a huge part of our sport, but yet we only practice it like 5 months out of the year, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
yet games are going to be won or lost based on it. Well, here's a sport, rugby, where you're not wearing pads or a helmet, because that's always been the excuse of football, right? Oh, well, we're not allowed to wear pads or a helmet. Well, neither are they. So let's do what they do. So we've been tackling uh, since the beginning of the off season. Initially, very simple, 1 or 2 steps, um, linear. But now we're to the point where, yeah, we're incorporating all the different movement qualities that we've worked on separately, accelerating, decelerating, and then at the end doing something with it, executing a rugby style tackle. And you know that's the last piece, obviously, is incorporating that sport skill. It doesn't have to be a tackle. It could be whatever your sport is, whatever the end goal is. Why are you trying to be agile? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to score a goal? Are you trying to make a basket? What is it we're trying to work on? And that's the end result, right? Being better at that. So
Yeah. What an answer. that was great, mate. Thank you for that. Such great detail, and provided a framework as well for each step of the way. Now working with, this is off the cuff question that I didn't add to the run sheet, but just got me thinking while you were explaining your philosophy there. Now that you're working in development pathways, and to give context to the question, there'll be parents listening in that are fearful of their kids going into the weight room, but they'll be playing combative sports, contact sports. So with that context, for contact sports, team sports, they're doing agility, they're getting hit. What's your stance on the weight room? Is it an age thing? Is it a technical thing? And then how objective would you be in terms of progressing them towards perhaps weightlifting? Right. Is that a technical thing? So age doesn't matter as long as they're proficient at the movement, quantitative, or is there some objective rules that you've got in place that you hold people account to? Yeah.
Well, I'll give 2 answers. I'll give my parent answer, and I'll give my strength and conditioning coach answer. So my parent answer is that it's practitioner based, right? So like, to me as a parent, I'm of the mindset that, like, you're the coach, what you say goes. And even though I'm also a coach, I stay out of it, right? Like, I don't want to, I'm there to cheer, right? I am strictly a fan and to support my kid. That being said, I'm going to do my due diligence and make sure that you're qualified to handle my children, right? Like, if they get hurt in the weight room, I chose the wrong coach, and that's on me, right? Like, you have to do due diligence and make sure that the practitioner that you're choosing is qualified, is knowledgeable, understands what they're doing, and has all the pieces of the puzzle to be able to put your child and trust them in their hands. Because you, as a practitioner, once I hand my child over, like I said, you what you say goes, man. I'm out. I'm a fan at that point. But I'm do the due diligence on the front end and make sure that you're qualified to do it. And if you're not, and I put my kid there and they get in harm's way, that's on me, right? I should have been more selective, and I am. Now, from the strength and conditioning point of view, yeah, I think that, again, as a practitioner, you've got to have your system in place in terms of what the beginning and the end looks like of an athletic career, training wise. And I'm very fortunate. I've been able to coach the most elite of pros, and now I'm working with 14-year-olds on the bottom end, and working forwards and backwards on the continuum of preparedness, as well as elite athleticism. But I would say that, again, you have to have a system, you have to have a vision, you have to have a plan. But at the end of the day, you also have to watch and look and evaluate right? Because I'll tell you right now, I've got 15-year-olds that can do everything that a college athlete can do almost as well as a college athlete can do. And I've got 15-year-old athletes that my 9-year-old daughter can perform better than in certain movements, and so there's really no rule and there's no set in stone. That's I guess that's what the point I'm getting at. It's so organic that you just have
Yeah.
to meet the athlete where they are in terms of development. And I know that that's not a very exact or a scientific answer, but that's the best I can come up with in terms of living it every day now, right?
Mm.
Like I can't just say, okay, and I have my incoming indoctrination, freshman, block zero, whatever you want to call it, that program. Um, but it's always going to need to be adjusted
Yeah.
because there's always people that, like push-ups and body weight squats, like you're great at those. Like you need something more. And then there's the person that, they might be 16 or 17 in my environment. And you know what, like that barbell back squat, like that's just not, not only is it not getting you better, it's honestly detrimental to you right now. Let's take a step back. So it just depends on, again, you as a coach, trusting your intuition, trusting your coaching eye, but having that system, having that program, having that plan in place allows you to move along the continuum. All right. If I see what you're doing is too remedial, I know what the next step is already. If I see what you're doing is too much for you, I know what the regression is already. So
Mm.
having that backbone of that plan, but not hesitating again, and so much of our conversation, I feel like, is mistakes that I made when I was younger, and what I've learned now that I'm older. But when I was younger, again, on my piece of paper is the perfect program, and so we're gonna do word for word what it says on the piece of paper in front of me because this is the greatest program in the world. And if you can't do it, I'm going to take it personally and I'm going to get frustrated with you. Right. Like, and now I know, number one, it's not the perfect program. And number two, like, that's on me. Right. Like, if something doesn't look right, am I not? First of all, it might be I'm not coaching it well enough. Maybe I didn't explain it to you properly. Maybe if I say it a little differently or coach it a little differently, maybe it'll look right. And sometimes it does. And sometimes, you know what? Nothing I can say. They're not ready for this. I'm going to do more harm than good here. Let's take a step back. So I guess what parents are looking for here is what age it's okay to lift weights. And again, I think it depends on your child. And I think it depends on the practitioner that you've given them to. And also it depends on their mentality. Because I'll tell
Mm.
you right now, it takes a certain level of maturity and attention to detail to be able to step into a weight room or even onto a field and be able to do formal training. You can play games, you can get out and play sports and play gamify everything, and that helps with younger kids. But in terms of formal training, there's a level of maturity that you can have that some 9 or 10-year-olds have, and then and some 14-year-olds don't, So to me, again, to summarize, it's level of maturity and focus, attention. It's the practitioner, and it's your individual child and what they need and what you're looking to get out of it.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Yeah, from it being in a unique position as well, being a parent, and then also knowing the industry. So thank you for that. Going back to the topic, what are some common challenges and solutions for athletes looking to develop agility for game day performance? So team-based athletes looking to improve
Right.
their agility.
So here's the piece that I'm going to focus on in this question. So you said team based athletes, which alludes to there being a large group. right? So to me,
Hmm.
that's the piece I haven't talked about necessarily yet. That if I can find one thing that I feel like I'm good at as a coach, it is the ability to make the most out of large groups in terms of, I hate to use the term individualization, but basically being able to meet the needs of a lot of different individuals in a large group setting, because it's tough, man.
Hmm.
It's tough, and that's one thing that if I've spent more time racking my brain over or poring over the years, it is that model, the team based model. We know that everyone's not the same. We know that everyone doesn't need the exact same thing. But yet, when there's 60 athletes out there, here comes the logistical issues, right? And depending on your staffing, here comes a number of other potential issues, right? So, I actually, what we do. So, like, let's take for instance, like, even though we're talking about agility, let's use an example in terms of like linear acceleration,
Hmm.
right? Like, so what we do, we'll take different drills and set them up like stations, and this isn't rocket science, right? But like, it allows you to do a number of different things with a lot of different athletes. So one station might be resisted sprinting with a sled or a band. One station might be a horizontal plyo that we know is going to complement acceleration. One station might be a wall drill or some type of patterning drill. One station might be um, a 4 cone or a step or a 7 cone. Some people call it like a tape drill, where you're working on stride length and start. And then one station might be a laser time 10 or something of that nature.
Hmm.
And you could do the same thing for agility. You could, if you're speaking in terms of a multi-directional day, set up 5 or 6 different things. And depending on how many athletes you have, it's let's say you've got 60 athletes, 8 to 10 athletes at each station, and you're the head strength coach, and you're overseeing, you designed it all, you're overseeing everything. And this would be in a situation where you're limited on staffing, because obviously if you're at a Power 5 school like I was at Texas Tech, and I had 5 full-time strength coaches and like 10 interns, it's easy. You just give each coach, these 4 or 5 guys need to work on this for their position, and then it becomes easy, right? But I'm talking about the environment I'm in now, because a lot of people aren't blessed with 3 football fields and 12 coaches, right? This is what we do now.
Yeah.
You're overseeing it. You've scripted it. It gives everybody a piece of what they need. So you're doing different things, right? Because so many times you got 60 people, the temptation is just run over there, touch the line, and run back. And I'll just blow the whistle and I'll hold the stopwatch, right? Because there's too many of you to coach. Well, there's not, right? Like, you break down the individual chunks and you work on those pieces. You assign, in the sport coaches can help with this, you assign the sport coaches to different stations, or if you have interns, they can run it too. You're overseeing the entire thing. You're able to prescribe the volume and the intensity, and each station basically functions as an opportunity for learning, an opportunity for skill development. And then at the end, you bring them all together, and now, which we haven't talked about, here's the opportunity to compete. All right, here's the opportunity to compete, whether it be in agility, which is obviously the focus of our conversation, whether it be in linear speed. Because I'll tell you what, you develop all these skills, you teach, you think you've got it ingrained, and then as soon as there's a winner or a loser, what happens to that skill? Boom,
Out the
it goes
window.
out the window, right? We just go, we just go, right? So every time we'll spend 30 minutes, like I just described, working on a variety of different skills that progress, right? I would say roughly every 2 weeks, depending on how it looks, we'll progress to a higher level of the new skill. And then we'll compete, because I want to see when the stress is ratcheted up, are you still able to exhibit those skills? Because if not, then I didn't do a very good job. Either I didn't coach them right, or I picked the wrong drills for you to learn them. That's one thing I'm big on, is that the drills, if you teach the drills right and you pick the right drills, those are your teachers, right? The drills are your teachers. Like, if guys can go through what I just described and they don't look any different, like, you're doing the wrong drills, right? Like, you need to be very intentional about the drills you pick, very intentional about how you progress them, and very intentional about how you teach them. And you should see improvement in skill. And then, just like we talked about agility, how you eventually have to test it by putting it in an unpredictable environment, or a environment where they now have to exhibit a sports skill. You test the skills that you've learned in whatever movement uh, realm by competing, by having a winner and a loser, or by, we try to laser time as many things as possible, just by ratcheting up the importance. Really allows you to see, like, okay, that skill is stable. Like, he competed against his teammates. Like, that change that we made in the technique, it's going to stick with him. So I'm always about teaching, but then I'm always going to come on the back end and put your feet in the fire a little bit and see, all right, have you really learned, or did you just get better at that drill? Because there's got to be carryover. Why are we? I mean, that's the whole goal, right? If I can only get you better during my sessions, then I didn't really get you better, did I? And that's one thing that I've grown a lot of as a coach, because I used to only want drills that I could get everyone to look perfect in. And I would hang my hat. I would go home a happy man as a young coach. Man, did you see how perfect all my guys looked in all my drills today? That was a great day. Well, no, because probably they've gone beyond that, right? They don't need those drills anymore. If they're that perfect at them, are you challenging them? Are you giving them what they need? You should be on the limit of ability, right? Like yes, it should be a drill that they're able to perfect if they really concentrate and try and get some experience at it. But if everyone looks great, it's probably too easy of a drill, right? And so now I want a little bit of things to coach, right? I want a little bit of, oh, you're trying to really learn here. This is a learning rich environment. He's struggling a little bit, right? That's not a bad thing as a coach, right? It should never be unsafe. It should never be outside the scope of their abilities. But they've got to struggle a little bit to learn, to adapt a skill. That's one thing. So when I was at South Carolina, I actually got accepted into the doctorate program in motor learning, motor behavior. And life took me in a different direction, as we already talked about. But I was going to be studying movement variability in athletes for my doctorate, and that's one thing that's always fascinated me is learning how athletes learn, but also, as we talked about earlier, movement, agility, whatever it is, it's just meeting the needs of a task, right? It's just trying to address a task. So on one hand, you've got athletes, and this is off on a tangent a little bit, but goes hand in hand with performance of a drill. On one hand, you've got athletes that are very creative, very artistic, and show a lot of movement variability. And then on the other hand, you've got the prototypical, and this was me as an athlete. Whatever the technique was, I was going to do it exactly as I was taught. And that's great, but what if the environment is a little more chaotic than we thought? You're still over here doing something by the book, and that's not going to meet the need of the task, right? So where's that sweet spot? On one hand, you've got somebody that's too variable, right? If you're too variable, one might call that inconsistent. You have no technique, right? You've got no technique. You're all over the place, right? But on the other end, you can be too rigid. So the great ones are the Pat Mahomes, the guys that can meet the most tasks with the most different movement tools, but at the end of the day, they're still within that bandwidth of optimal technique. So that's a long and I went off into left field with that one, but whenever I talk movement, that's a lot of the things I think about.
Yeah.
Is position, how to get athletes to learn, because that's what we are. We're teachers. How to get athletes to learn, and also uh, how movement is variable. And there's the, as you mentioned, the big rocks. There's the attractors and the fluctuators, right? As Bosch would say,
Hmm.
like certain things
Hmm.
that you have to do in order to be an effective mover, and then the rest of it is stylistic, right? And we don't want to rob athletes of that style in the optimal way that they find to perform things. So
Yeah, and I'm sure coaches listening will all have those athletes, the ones that naturally are so good at being able to meet the task, but perhaps the inconsistencies there as they don't have the traditional training behind them. And then there'll be, yeah, like you mentioned, those that have been through traditional training, but might be too rigid on game day. So I really liked how you broke that down and trying to meet them in the middle on and how to break big groups into circuits and have themes to your training and teach, and then put it all together and see how they go under stress. So there's a question that's come through from someone listening in, Macca from YouTube. We'll just touch on this one quickly before going into the last couple of questions on the topic. But Macca's, what do you think about the products like the IsoTib and the IsoTib LT for strengthening the tibialis? And then he's written in brackets decelerations
right,
on that
yeah.
topic of
So
decelerations.
I'll be 100% honest. I've never heard of or seen that product. Obviously, I'm all for strengthening the tibialis and its role in movement, but I honestly can't say that I've seen or heard of that product. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to look into it now. So thank you for that recommendation. I need to deepen my understanding of that product really before I can comment on that.
Yeah, I'm in the same. I haven't heard it before, so I can't touch on that one either, Macca. But yeah, I'll look into it, and feel free to hit us up on socials for an answer in the future. Touched on it before, the importance of bringing in skill coaches in your circuits, and particularly if you need staff on each section. But I'm interested to know, do you plan your agility training with the tactical and the skill coaches? And for those listening that may have not done that before, what would be some tips in terms of how to get buy-in from coaches and how to collaborate with the tactical coaches
Yes.
in
So
drill design?
I think I wouldn't say that I necessarily collaborate in terms of the nuts and bolts of drill design or session organization, but where the collaboration does take place for me and should take place for you is in the film room or in the coach's office, as well as watching the sport being played, because you've got to understand what's going on, right? Like you've got to understand what the athletes are being asked to do, not only movement wise, but goal wise, task wise. The more you can understand the sport, the easier it's going to be to do everything that we talked about, right? So it's like I talked about earlier. Like I may sound like I know what I'm talking about, but if you ask me about the golf swing, we'd be on here for 30 seconds and you'd think this guy's an idiot, right? Like there are sports that I don't understand to the level. Now, if you hired me to train that sport, I would research, I would watch video, I would go to game, and I could eventually figure it out. But the sports that I do know, primarily, as I mentioned, American football, yeah, I mean, I watch tape, watch practice, speak to coaches, ask questions of coaches. I try to understand, as I mentioned, because you can watch and you can look at, oh, okay, they move laterally. Oh, okay, they do a lot of you know, forward backward deceleration, right? Because they have to get behind the guy that has the ball if they hope to ever get the ball, right? Like you can see that as a casual fan, but what's inside, why are they doing those things, right? Like what's the goal? What task is being asked of him, and what is he trying to accomplish with these movements? And if you understand those things, because the other pieces, the energy systems, the strength qualities. I mean, I guess for the uninitiated, those would be things that you would have to really think about. But I think most of us can look and understand, all right, what strengths are at play and what the energy systems look like. But yeah, those movements, a lot of times they can be tricky. But again, I really want to get to the heart of it, right? Not just what movements they're doing, but what causes them to do those movements. Because that's really those last two layers of agility that we talked about. Like, why is he decelerating? You know, what is he trying to get to or get away from? And that all comes from the sport. That comes from the sport coaches. And at the end of the day, like we talked about, the realities of professional sport are you're going to be evaluated alongside those guys, right? So if if the team's going to get better, your strength and conditioning program, you might have all the great data in the world that these guys get stronger and faster, but if they're not playing their sport better, um, you're part of the problem. Like, you missed the boat somewhere. So you have to go back and say, okay, where could I have gotten this transfer of training to come across more? And a lot of times it's doing everything you're doing, but packaging it differently, putting it into situations that look and feel more like their sport. And again, that's the last horizon, right? That doesn't mean, like, from day one you've got to, throw a rugby ball at them. Like, there's plenty of stuff generally that we can work on. As I mentioned, I'm always about the underpinning, just be a better athlete, a more robust athlete first. But when you talk about transfer of training and you talk about the professional level, yeah, it comes down to that. It comes down to being able to bleed what we're doing into the skills. And if that bleeding doesn't take place, why is it not taking place? Do you not understand the sport enough? Are you too egotistical to ask questions of the sport coaches? Or maybe there's a piece of your program that needs to get better, on a general level. So yeah, I mean, you got to watch film, you got to understand the sport, whatever that looks like to you.
Absolutely. Mindful of your time, and I know we've covered this in great detail, this topic, but before we move into the final questions outside of this key topic, is there anything on agility and max velocity that you'd like to touch on, Scott, before we wrap it up that we've missed?
No, I guess, we've spent a lot of time talking about, the transfer of training and getting it over to the sport. But I think I'm real big on measuring things. And there's these days, right? Like, there's GPS, there's every type of technology out there. So there's really no excuse, even if it's just laser timing, like, you've got to collect data. It just helps us as a profession. It helps strengthen your argument, whether it be force plate data, whether it be GPS data, but even if it's just something simple like laser timing sprints, or the weight room's easy, right? Because the weights weigh a certain amount. You can track how much guys are lifting, but the days of just shooting from the hip and just doing stuff and making sure they work hard and then we'll just see what happens. Those days are gone. The world is so data driven now that you better be collecting some type of data, not only to justify what you're doing, but to evaluate yourself, what you're doing, right? Like, yeah, it's nice to be able to go to your head coach and be like, look, like for instance today, right? Like, and this is something very simple. So a laser timed flying 10 with a 20-yard run-in. So today is 1 year from the date that we tested it last year, and we had 21 guys beat our best time from last year, right? Which may sound astronomical, but you would never know that, right? Like, unless you collected that data. And we do have GPS monitors too, so I know how fast guys are running and all of those things. But it may sound too sciencey, but your players get off on that. Like, they love feedback. They love to know how they're doing. Like, I got kids that come running to me because they're able to check their data on their phone. We have the Stat Sport units, and they'll come running to me, coach, I ran 21.5 miles an hour today. so fired up, right? Or their parents will come to me and be like, "Oh, I heard, Joey broke 20 miles an hour today. He was so fired up." It just makes everything better, right? It just solidifies that, in the eyes of everyone around you, but also yourself, like, okay, this is working, and guys are getting better. Or if they're not, wow, guys aren't getting better at this, right? Like, what, something's wrong, like for
Mm.
instance, like right now in my program, uh, 10 to 20, because 40-yard dash is our big, linear speed test in football. 10 to 20 is not our best right now. So clearly, somewhere in my program, I'm not addressing the transition to max velocity, right? And I'm not saying we're bad at it, but if I'm looking at the data, like, okay, our start is great, our max speed for the genetics that we have is great, but there's a black hole in the middle, in the tunnel there, and I got to figure it out. And unless you're tracking that type of stuff, you would never know. So long story short, man, whatever your budget allows, track something. It's the athletes love it, the parents love it, and it helps solidify whether your program is working or not working.
Yeah, it's great. Like you mentioned, the objective approach, data-driven world. But then I think the most important part, well, certainly what I took away from that, is make sure you're applying it and using it to your programming and to your coaching. I think that's a great piece of advice and a great way to wrap up the topic, mate, which is a really interesting one for all coaches and anyone tuning in. Moving over to the personal side, are there pet peeves in the industry or things that sort of make you angry still as a coach?
No, man. I think as I'm getting a little more laid back in my old age, I would say like pet peeves, like, as far as the industry, man, like, I think, I guess I would say, and maybe this is, me being a little too old school, because I have Twitter and Instagram and all those things, but like, there are plenty of good coaches that are active on social media, but to me, being active on social media doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good coach or better than the next guy. Like, I think we've reached the stage now where the most respected coaches are the ones that post the most, right? And
Mm.
that's not necessarily the case. Now, like I said, I'm not bashing guys that post a lot. I know some of the guys that are some of the most respected on social media, and they do a great job, and they're incredible coaches. So I'm not bashing social media, but I do think that there's a little bit of a
Overemphasis
issue
of it.
when
Yeah.
famous strength coaches are just the ones that post the most, right? Like, I mean, there's got to be more to it than that. And so I guess maybe that, but again, maybe I'm getting old and grumpy. I don't know. Maybe I need to start posting more, and then I'll be a little more famous. But yeah, no, man, that's pretty much it. Like, and I just think, like, be open-minded and help instead of judge,
Mhm.
because to me, if you have good intentions, if you have a reason for what you're doing, and if you have a plan, like, more power to you, man. Like, roll it out there and let's see what happens. If those three things are in place, like, you mean well, you have thought behind it, and you got a plan, like, go get it. You know what I mean? I don't like people that just do stuff, that just shoot from the hip, you know, like have a plan and mean well and know what you're doing. And great, man. If I might not do it that way, but you might be right and I might be wrong.
Mm. Yeah, many roads to Rome, definitely in our industry, that's
Mhm.
for sure. What about favourite way to spend your day off?
Yeah, so like I said, I have a million kids. I have two daughters, 9 and 6, two stepsons, 5 and 3, and a son on the way, due in June. So,
Yeah,
a lot of stuff
congratulations.
with family. Like, both of my daughters are athletes. My older daughter plays flag football and soccer, and I help coach her flag football team, actually, which I would never have been able to do in college. But now at the high school level, I have enough free time that I'm able to go out there and coach her. And my younger daughter, She's about to turn 7. She's an incredible soccer player. She plays on academy soccer, which is year-round, the highest level of soccer for that age group. I don't coach her because I don't know nearly enough about soccer even to coach 6-year-olds. So, but I go and I cheer, and she's incredible at that. So I'm going to their games, or if I'm not going to their games, we're going to do something fun as a family. So it's not, that's pretty much if it's my day off, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're recording this in April, so early 2023. What's on the horizon for you? What are you excited about from a professional point of view for the rest of the year?
Yeah. So like I said, personally, my son will be born in June, so that'll be big. Professionally, I just want to. A key theme that we've talked about a lot is development, right? And so, like at the level I'm at now, it's a very developmental level. But again, through the data tracking and through just keeping, evaluating my program, we've seen so much growth. I've been here now like a year and a half, almost 2 years. The amount of growth that we've experienced, both quantitatively, but also through things like just feedback from parents, in terms of my son is so much more confident. I don't even recognize him anymore. He walks differently. He talks differently. He believes in himself. That's what I'm here for, right?
Making a real impact.
I'm not, and some of these kids will, our quarterback could be the next Pat Mahomes. You don't know. Like some of these kids will reach that level, but if they don't, I want to know that I left some type of legacy with them in terms of developing them, yes, physically, but also emotionally, mentally. And it sounds cliche, but I mean, like that they're moldable right now. And my high school football coach had a huge impact on me. I was a clown. I was a jokester. Whatever I was going to get a laugh out of, that's what I was going to be doing. And now, the ability to focus and place an importance and a commitment on something, and day in, day out, be consistent and work ethic, all of those things, that my parents preached to me were strengthened in that formative experience through high school football. And I just want to be able to give that gift to these kids. And when they leave, not only will they have matured physically, but they'll have matured in every other way that will make them a better person and a better member of society.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, they're lucky to have you. And like you mentioned, it's such a pivotal age to have someone rock solid and making you better. And probably the relationship that's built in the weight room can sometimes be far stronger than perhaps teachers, or certainly different relationship anyway. So yeah, it's a really important role, both from an athletic point of view, but also just in life in general. So love your work, mate. Thank you so much for jumping on and sharing with us. Both from parents would have got something out of that. S&C certainly did, and some tips and tricks for athletes to take their game to another level. So really appreciate your time jumping on, and thank you for everyone that's tuned in as well. We'll post this next week on Wednesday, where we post every week our most recent episode. But for the time being, if you tuned in halfway, make sure to listen to the start. It'll live on our YouTube channel. But thanks again, Scott. If anyone has any follow-up questions or they want to get in contact, mate, where's the best place to get in contact or connect with you?
I'm on Twitter, Coach S. Sal, and then Instagram as well. And, I'm an open book. I got no secrets. So hit me up. And I'll talk shop with anybody. Yeah, it's
fantastic.
Been a pleasure, man. Like really enjoyed this. I see we've been on for like an hour and 18. I'm like, man, it went by quick because I was talking the whole time. But I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully, everyone got something out of this.
100% they did. Yeah, you can tell you're passionate about it. It comes through, and yeah, time certainly did fly. But there's some great information there, your wealth of knowledge. So yeah, really appreciate it again, and yeah, thank you. And if you're ever in down under, make sure to reach out. And yeah, likewise over in the States, we'll have to connect.
I would love to. Thank you.